Hi, my name is Flo, I work at Integro Languages, and I spend a lot of time worrying about translating jokes. When Tom asked me to give a talk today, I was pretty frightened. I'm clearly no good at public speaking. Anxious thoughts started coming in. What if people laugh at me? What if they don't? I'm sure it'll be fine. I've made a fool out of myself in public plenty of times before. When I was a teenager, my mum and I moved to Spain. Mostly because my mum fancied an adventure. She started uni the year that I started high school to study linguistics and came home on her first day absolutely buzzing. She'd been offered the opportunity to change to double honours with Spanish, which would involve a year abroad. In 2001, that was your second year. So after a year of beginners, hello, I am, we were off. Nowadays, they do hold off till your third year, but they let us go. It was pretty alienating. Oh, sorry, I've lost my place. On my first day, I walked into school, didn't speak a word of Spanish beyond, sí, no, me llamo Flo, Harry Potter. I sort of sat there as everything chaosed around me, could not figure out what was going on. At lunchtime, a kind group of girls invited me over to their table, and a happy dinner lady came over and asked me a question. Couldn't understand it. I could tell from her cadence that it was either going to be a yes or a no answer. I'm having an adventure. I rolled the dice. Sí. She came back a few minutes later, holding the biggest roast turkey I've ever seen, and a cleaver. I was a vegetarian as a teenager. My mum was a hippie. It's the closest I'd ever been to a piece of meat in my life, and I did what anyone would do. Fled the room sobbing. A few years later, I caught up with one of the girls who I'd been spending time with there. We're good friends now that I actually know what's going on. She explained to me that, from her perspective, the dinner lady had welcomed me and greeted me as a guest of honour, new person at the school. I was so exotic. Did I want to carve the turkey? Made everything subsequent a little bit embarrassing for me, to be honest. But I got on with things. My friends were kind, my friends were gracious. They helped me out when I didn't know what was going on. Bit by bit, I picked up the language. What I couldn't pick up was why. I would turn up to school, they would send letters home, my mum would sign them. 2 or 3 days later, perhaps something mysterious would happen. I started carrying a clean t-shirt and knickers in the bottom of my school bag after a surprise residential. Things got weirder and weirder. It felt like the more that I understood the words, the less I understood what was going on. It was kind of a paradox, a cusp of being understanding. At Christmas time, all the adverts started sounding a little bit weird, and I did not know why. Turns out, children sing the Spanish National Lottery numbers for 7 hours on December the 22nd, and that pretty much dominates Spanish culture. Sorry, I had a video of that, but I don't know where it's gone. Anyway, you can imagine. It was pretty alienating to be having all these surreal experiences with nobody to bounce them off, nobody to kind of horn my trauma with into neat little anecdotes. I hung out with my friends and I was gracious for the pauses they gave me to kind of stammer out a thought, not unlike how I'm doing now. I still didn't quite understand what was going on. It was clear that humour creates bonds between people and that I wasn't part of that. It's a way of creating a group of insiders, a group of outsiders, and without my language skills, I couldn't get there. She's terribly pixelated, isn't she? That's Gloria from Modern Family. She's frustrated that nobody knows how smart she is in Spanish. Not a bad summation of my time in Spain. Eventually I got there, I got used to it, it was okay. But it took a lot of work, much more than just the words, to be able to understand what was going on. As an adult, several years later, I started undergrad in Spanish, feeling like I had a bit of an advantage being able to speak Spanish, having been to school there. At the tail end of my undergrad degree, quite by chance, I picked up a book of poetry written during Pinochet's dictatorship in Chile between the 70s and the 90s. I don't know if it was the stress of finals, whether to get a job, carry on studying, but I got a bit weird about Pinochet. Pinochet was, it's fair to say, part of a certain kind of archetype of South American dictators from the 80s. You know, steal people from the street, disappear them, throw distance out of helicopters, convert your football stadiums into high-volume torture centres. By this point, my Spanish was as good as it was going to be, but there were still a lot of things that I didn't understand. It felt like being at school all over again. I bought more and more books, I read reports, I read autobiographies. I learned as much academically as I could, but I still couldn't quite understand what the poems were about, what the meaning was. There was obviously art there was humour, and I couldn't catch it. Eventually, I picked up a memoir by Rafael Gumucio, who was an adolescent at the time of the regime, and things started to tick on in my mind. He's an interesting guy. Born in 1970, him and his family were a group of left-wing politicians, thinkers, artists, musicians, who were exiled to France at the start of the regime. As a teenager, Raphael came back, and he started getting involved with some left-wing groups trying to kind of disrupt the military state, I guess. This period of life is all recounted in his first book, Premature Memories, which I translated as part of my postgrad. It's kind of memoir, kind of fiction, kind of a history book. It's pretty weird. Some of it's quite harrowing. He discovers his aunt's violated corpse turning up at the bottom of a ravine. One of his teachers is assassinated from him at school. But worse, it's funny. It's a hilarious book. I don't know if it's the juxtaposition of the pun against the cruelty, if it's the absurd mental images against those of torture and death, but it leaves the reader laughing in a way where you're really not sure if it's okay. Getting there didn't come without loads of research on my part. It would be arrogant to assume otherwise. So much of our upbringing is our culture, our sense of humour, our class. I was a 20-something British girl in a two-up, two-down student house share in Norwich, pretty far from Chile in the 80s. I had to work, and I worked really hard to find the references, to build up a picture of what was going on. And I could not make it funny. I really struggled. I couldn't work out if it was my place to be responsible to make it funny, because these were somebody's memories from a traumatic part of his life. And to get frustrated because I couldn't find the wordplay felt pretty petty and pretty disrespectful. I swung between feeling like I was doing something important, honouring and raising awareness of something that doesn't really get too much coverage in this part of the world, but also, am I messing around in something that intrinsically doesn't belong to me? Was everything okay? I found it hard to balance. Explaining why the jokes are funny involved so much pretty horrible kind of cultural background, unpleasant historical background. It was really difficult. I tried taking out the jokes that depended on this, and then I was just left with a text full of gunshots. I tried adding in jokes that didn't need that knowledge to land. That felt cheap. Didn't have the authority to do that with someone's memories, did I? I tried footnotes, adding text in line. Nothing really seemed quite right. Adding extra information made the text really dark, and everyone knows when you explain a joke, that's what kills it. I wondered what Rafael Gumucio would do. There he is, cool guy. George Orwell once remarked that every joke is a tiny revolution, and Plato suggests that laughter is a way of expressing superiority over another party. Mocking the dictatorship would rob it of its power, and that, in that case, must be my job. That was the point. Gumucio himself wasn't afraid of a little bit of controversy. He was arrested in 1998 for taking the piss out of the leader of the Supreme Court. He also started a satirical magazine called The Clinic, which is named after where Pinochet was arrested from in London in 1998. These days, he's the director of the Institute for Humour at the Universidad de Diego Portales in Chile. He's a funny guy. He likes to laugh, he likes to joke, he likes to tell his story. While I was still haunted by moments where I felt like I was messing around with my dirty fingers in someone else's past, somehow I kind of felt like I owed it to him to make the English funny. So I came back over and over again to the idea of community. His text works for a Chilean audience because they had all experienced the same thing. So I had to find a way to make the English-speaking audience be aware of the same thing. Unfortunately, my time was running out, nearly time for submission, and I was exhausted. I created a little bit of a heinous artifact. I'm really sorry. I made a leaflet. It's not a great solution at postgrad level. No one wants to do homework before they have a laugh. But for me, it was the only way that I could find to resolve this. I could share what I'd learned with the reader in an accessible way, bring the mood down, and then bring it back up again with Gumuthio's work. Translation often doesn't have a neat and tidy answer, and I'd ended up feeling like this was the only alternative to taking the humour out altogether. After nearly 2 years of reading nothing but testimonials from Chilean dissidents, I needed something funny, to be honest. So I ran through this a little because I can't use computers, but humour has all sorts of purposes. It can be simply for the joy of laughing. It can build bonds between me down here and you guys up there. It can be a coping mechanism during dark times when your family are being torn asunder. It can be a way of punching up, of kind of establishing that you're fine, your society can cope with a power greater than you taking control of your life. It can be a release of nervous energy. Humour gives pleasure, and it allows us to view a situation through a new lens. It can be a tool for social criticism. My very favourite of all. It can be a way of getting revenge on God. Thank you. Sorry, I'll pop that back down my shirt.
It's all right. So I actually do have a question to start with as well. The fact that you felt like you were fiddling with someone's memories and that felt like it was too important for you to really get in and play with and all that, and was it really your place to do that? Was it because it was the subject matter, or do you think it matters that it is someone's personal memories? Is it that sort of visceral nature of what was going on?
I think, excuse me.
Sorry, we can hear you. It's good.
Cool. Any translator will have that sort of nervous breakdown of what right do I have to other people's work? Yeah. If somebody's written a great Russian novel and I've never been to Russia, do I know what's going on? But I think ultimately you have to kind of believe in yourself, think about it really in terms of practice. Like I tried a lot of stuff and I did my best ultimately. And that's all you can do really. I think you're always going to be haunted if you're working with other people's texts about the idea of what might they think about them, what do they think that you're doing. But as long as you're doing your best by the text, it's kind of okay to me.
I mean, I liked the solution you came up with personally. I think it's great. Has anyone got any questions for Flo? Oh, wow, right, okay, lots. I'm going to throw the thing.
Oh, the cube.
You ready?
Blimey.
So I think you can just hold it and talk.
Scream into the cube.
Flo, lovely talk, great listening to you. You talk a lot about the text and why you use the text for your research and your academic progress. You don't talk about, and whether you didn't have the time, I don't know, actually talking to Chilean expats about what they thought of Gumuthio. Did they find him funny? Perhaps with your knowledge of Spanish, perhaps actually talking to the group and then reflecting that against the text might have been encouraging. I don't know.
Yeah, I spoke to a lot of people and I read a lot of testimonials, and simply for what I just wanted to set out was, is it possible to make this funny?
Yeah.
And my answer was pretty much no. But I tried at every point to do it with respect, looking at not only Gamulvio's own texts. I mean, he's co-founder of a weekly satire magazine that goes back since the 90s. You know, there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of discourse about things that he's written, that kind of how it lands in Chile. He's kind of a 50-50 figure. Some Chileans think that he's flippant, some Chileans don't really rate him. I can see where they're coming from, but for me it was more of a kind of technical challenge rather than an emotional one.
Right, I mean, this by no way was criticism at all. I just find it fascinating what you've done, so well done, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk.
Thank you.
It was great. Really interesting. I've got a question that is a bit, I don't know how I'm going to phrase this, but how do you see the role of slang in translation? Is that really kind of how that evolves within a culture? What contributes to kind of the mismatch between...
That's a really interesting question.
And just as a follow-up,
yeah.
How has the internet and kind of social media impacted that, do you think?
That's a really interesting question with an interesting follow-up, and if I forget the follow-up, you'll have to remind me. I went to school in Spain, in rural Spain, in 2001. So I talk like a 13-year-old girl from a farming community in 2001. Slang for me is it's interesting, especially working with Latin American texts, which are really, really different to the Spanish that I grew up learning. It's sort of thing where you have to speak to a lot of people, you have to speak to communities, do research, read, try and understand, try and use engrams, see how language is actually used. That's something that the internet has helped massively with. But equally, the internet's kind of made everything a bit anglicised. You know, there's, certainly in Spain, there's the RAE, who are the authority that decide whether or not words go in the dictionary, and they come down pretty hard on parking and, Harry Potter. I just love to say it. I think that, unfortunately, moving away, Spain will become, or Spanish as a language will become more homogenised, and a kind of, certainly the memes and the Twitter accounts that I follow are kind of aping Anglophone culture, but I think there are still little pockets of the internet that try and protect it.
Oh, thank you.
I love this box. Do I actually have to push anything or just...
Scream into
brilliant.
the box.
Going to get one of these for the theatre. This may be blasphemous.
Like I'm
blasphemous
not.
question. But just to ask you specifically, but in terms of translation, I mean, Google Translate is hilarious in a number of different ways because of how maybe awful it is at translating. Have you ever taken a piece of translation that you've done and done a comparison to what Google would do?
Oh, yeah.
How does that come out?
Depressing if it's your own work. There's a lot of things, even with Spanish, like in my day job. I work for a translation agency, and we're always trying to establish, are you launching in Spain or are you launching in South America? Because in Spain, fresa means strawberry. In South America, it means prostitute. You know, there's a bunch of things that you have to be aware of that, kind of as Dom said, the computers don't know. The computers don't know what you're trying to do. The computers don't know if it's Lady Gaga with one of her biggest fans or Lady Gaga with an air conditioning unit, also a fan. You know, I think there are huge things that we can do, a lot of things that are kind of automated when text comes up over and over again. But with jokes, again, I kind of agree with Dom that it needs, even if not human hands, human eyes to make sure.
Yeah, cool, thank you.
Thank you for asking.
Who's next?
You're an embarrassment, Lee.
It's the big bit. Oh, hello. It's frightening, isn't it? No, I've forgotten what I was going to play. Flo, you said at the beginning that you clearly can't do public speaking. I think you're wrong. You're absolutely wrong.
Thank you.
Thank you. Right, listen. Yeah, you might be nervous, but fuck it. You got up, you stood up there and you've done it, and you also had the courage to stop halfway through and ask for time, right? I wouldn't have the balls to do
I
that.
appreciate that, thank you.
Sorry to take you back to the turkey incident,
It's fine,
but I
I've
feel
seen a
this
therapist.
is a
I've been through
seminal
it.
moment in your life. When did you finally kind of understand Spanish jokes? Even if you have, is there a point now? You know, when you were there?
Sometimes especially if I'm translating something, I've got some Spanish friends now, especially having been to uni there and worked alongside them where they're learning English. We kind of have a group chat where it's completely judgment-free. I don't understand why this is funny, can you tell me? And it might be something to do with, I don't know, Blue Peter, which simply doesn't exist in Spain. Are you going to map that whole joke onto the equivalent Spanish TV program? I think you can only be properly 100% funny in a community that you've spent a lot of time living in. And the more time I spend away from Spain, the more I look at Twitter and think, what the hell is going on here? But yeah, I try and keep my hand in, and again, the internet makes it kind of a bit of an interesting Wild West place to do so.
Is Flo's guide, can I ask one more thing? Is Flo's guide, if it's not real, can it be real? With the Flow, the guide that you said you wrote, the leaflet?
The leaflet, yeah.
Is it real?
Yeah, I submitted it as an appendix to my master's degree.
Right.
It has slightly more austere graphic design, obviously. I didn't put a skull on it.
Is it fit for public consumption?
Yeah, I'll drop you an email.
Yes. Thank you. Gracias.
Okay. Also, again, thank you for the talk. This was really cool. As someone who worked as a translator myself, I'm like, yes, this is the perfect nerd theme. But I wanted to know, do you remember one of the jokes that you translated where you were really proud of, where you're like, yeah, got something good, if you can share?
There's one joke in a play that took me about 8 weeks to translate.
Yeah.
Really cutting that 12-week deadline tight. Where the Spanish word for a carjack is the same as like a slang term for a woman that you're with, but kind of you don't really respect.
Yeah.
And there's a misunderstanding that comes from that. And I had a database of every single word to do with anything that you could use to fix a car and all the horrible misogynistic language that you can use towards women. I just went through saying them all out loud until I found one that worked in both languages, wench and wrench. And I was proud about that.
I love that.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more? Any questions? Oh, okay. Right, watch it, Tom.
Are you actually capable of being funny in Spanish now?
Not on command.
Go on, now, do it. No, because similarly to you, I lived in France for a very, very long time, and in English, a big part of my personality is humour. I really enjoy it and value it. And I'm not funny in French, as much as I want to be. I just can't
Tom, I've
really...
got bad news.
I mean, I'm not that funny in English, clearly, but I'm not funny in French. It just doesn't work. They go like, you've got weird British humour, dude. It just doesn't work. Are you funny in Spanish?
In Spain, they don't really use sarcasm. And I lived with my Spanish housemate for 4 months before she realised that I was being sarcastic. She thought I just didn't know what was going on. So it's not only just kind of having the language skills, but it's knowing what people find funny. I went to a lot of kind of stand-up comedy nights in Spain, and they love to put a little hat on and just do a little dance. And I was there with another English person thinking, what? Are we wrong? Yeah. Thank you, good question. Only a little bit offensive.
Any more? Any more? Oh, yeah, one more. I think
Crikey.
we'll have one more question.
Thank you for moving along from the talk, or I panicked. I appreciate this bit.
There's the saying that English is sort of 4 languages masquerading in a trench coat, pretending to be a language. Does anything ever actually directly translate to any other language that you work with? Or is it always you're trying to recreate kind of the meaning of what you meant?
That's a really good question. It depends what you're trying to do. If I'm trying to communicate some information, I just want to communicate the information to you. With things like jokes and marketing and taglines, you have to kind of look at the culture, look at whether or not it's going to work. Sometimes things don't work. Everyone's seen the Google Translate terrors of, I think it's Pepsi will bring ancestors back to life, and the Vauxhall no va, which is Spanish for doesn't go. So sometimes there are things that work and there are things that aren't. In my day job, we do a lot of kind of launching things to audiences in different countries, and they are very keen to tell us when it doesn't work. Sometimes you just have to humiliate yourself.
Fair enough. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful talk, by the way.
Thank you. Good catch.
Any more questions? Got time for one more. Okay, good. We are going to take a 15-minute break. Thank you so much, Flo. I know this is a bit out of your comfort zone, but you were amazing. Thank you.